The Duke married the Obese Maid as a bet. On their wedding night, she shocked him. A proud noble makes a cruel wager in the candlelit halls of his estate and takes a servant girl as his bride. To him, it is a jest. To her, it is sacred vows before God. But when the door closes on their wedding night, the maid he thought simple and weak speaks with a voice of fire, revealing wisdom, learning, and a secret far greater than her humble dress. Whispers spread through the court. A wager turned into a scandal that could strip a man of his honor and raise a woman from the ashes of mockery. Yet behind the laughter of nobles lies a truth that could topple families and rewrite bloodlines. She is not who they think she is. Now the bells toll. The crowd murmurs, and the Duke must choose between pride and love, ruin and redemption. But when a marriage begins as a cruel bet, what will it take to turn it into a love worth dying for? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. In the vast great hall of Hawthorne House, dozens of beeswax candles cast their warm glow upon the feast-laden tables. The heavy scent of roasted venison mingled with wood smoke from the massive stone fireplace, while red wine flowed freely among the assembled noblemen. Their laughter echoed off the ancient timber beams overhead, growing louder with each passing hour. Duke Alistair Hawthorne sat at the head of the long oak table, his handsome features flushed from too much claret. His dark hair fell rakishly across his forehead as he lifted his crystal goblet in yet another toast. The day's successful hunt had only fed his natural arrogance. "To the finest hunters in all of England," he proclaimed, his voice carrying across the hall. The assembled lords raised their glasses in response, their rings glinting in the candlelight. Lord Fenwick, seated at Alistair's right hand, watched the young Duke with calculating eyes. "Your Grace certainly proved your mastery today," he said, smoothly refilling Alistair's glass. "One might say there's nothing you cannot accomplish when you set your mind to it." "'Tis true," Alistair declared, taking another deep drink. "No challenge exists that I cannot meet, no obstacle I cannot overcome." "No woman who could humble you?" Fenwick pressed, his thin lips curving into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Alistair laughed loudly. "Certainly not. What woman alive could bring the Duke of Hawthorne to heel?" The other lords exchanged knowing glances, sensing entertainment to come. Lord Fenwick leaned forward, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "Care to make a wager on that bold claim, Your Grace?" "Name your terms," Alistair replied without hesitation, too deep in his cups to notice the gleam of malice in Fenwick's gaze. "Marry the lowliest servant in your household," Fenwick proposed. "Prove that your pride can withstand even that test." A murmur of shocked amusement rippled through the assembled nobles. Alistair's eyes narrowed. "You dare suggest I sully the Hawthorne name with such a match?" "Oh, come now," another lord called out. "Surely the great Duke Hawthorne isn't afraid of a mere marriage?" Just then, the kitchen door creaked open, and Marjorie Wells entered, carrying a fresh platter of meat. She moved carefully despite her size, her plain face concentrated on her task. The nobles fell silent, watching her with cruel anticipation. "There's your bride," Fenwick whispered, pointing toward Marjorie. "The fat kitchen maid all the servants mock. Surely she's low enough to prove your point." Alistair's pride warred with his sense of dignity. The wine made the decision for him. "Done," he declared, pushing back from the table. "I'll wed her this very night." Fenwick's smile widened. "I took the liberty of having the chaplain prepare a special license, Your Grace. He awaits in the chapel even now." The assembled lords erupted in raucous laughter and crude jokes, rising to follow their host. Servants pressed against the walls, watching with worried eyes as the noble party stumbled through the corridors toward the chapel, dragging a confused Marjorie along with them. In the chapel, the atmosphere grew thick with tension. Moonlight filtered through the stained glass windows, joining the warm glow of altar candles. The chaplain stood trembling before the altar, his hands clutching his prayer book. He had always feared scandal, and now here it was, wrapped in nobility's finest clothes. "My lord," he began hesitantly, "perhaps we should wait until morning." "Proceed," Alistair commanded, swaying slightly as he took his place. His fine hunting clothes seemed out of place in the solemn setting. Marjorie stood beside him, her work-worn hands clasped tightly together. Though confusion showed in her eyes, she held herself with quiet dignity. Her faith had always been her anchor, and even now, facing this strange turn of events, she trusted in God's plan. The chaplain's voice quavered as he began the ceremony. The assembled lords watched with barely suppressed mirth, nudging each other and whispering behind their hands. Lord Fenwick stood closest to the altar, his face a mask of false solemnity that barely concealed his satisfaction. When the moment came for the vows, Alistair spoke his part with exaggerated flourish, playing to his audience. But when it was Marjorie's turn, the chapel fell silent at her response. "I do," she said firmly, her voice clear and steady. There was no hesitation, no shame in her tone. Only the simple dignity of one who knew her own worth in God's eyes, if not in man's. The chaplain pronounced them man and wife, his words echoing in the hushed chapel. Alistair turned to his noble companions with a triumphant smirk, already anticipating how he would laugh about this jest in the morning. Marjorie remained still, her eyes closed in silent prayer. The candlelight softened her plain features as she asked for the strength she knew she would need in the days to come. Lord Fenwick watched them both, satisfaction clear in his sharp features. The trap had been laid and sprung with all the precision of a hunter stalking his prey. In the shadows of the chapel, servants whispered among themselves, knowing they were witnessing the beginning of a scandal that would shake Hawthorne House to its foundations. The heavy oak door creaked open as Duke Alistair Hawthorne led his new bride into his private chambers. Dozens of beeswax candles illuminated the lavish room, their light reflecting off gilt-framed mirrors and polished furniture. The enormous carved bed, draped in crimson velvet, dominated the space. Alistair's unsteady steps betrayed the wine still coursing through his blood. He turned to Marjorie with a mocking smile, expecting to find her cowering or weeping. Instead, she stood quietly, her hands folded at her waist, her plain face composed despite the cruel circumstances that had brought her here. "Well, my lovely bride," he drawled, dropping into a plush armchair. "Pray tell, how does it feel to suddenly find yourself a duchess? Though I dare say the title sits as awkwardly upon you as that ill-fitting gown." Marjorie met his gaze steadily. "'Tis not the garment that makes the woman, your grace, nor the title that makes the noble. As Solomon wrote, 'Like a gold ring in a pig's snout is a beautiful woman who shows no discretion.'" Alistair straightened, surprise flickering across his features. "You quote scripture? How unexpected from a kitchen maid." "I find great comfort in holy words," she replied simply. "As Milton wrote, the mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven." The Duke rose abruptly, wine sloshing in his goblet. "Milton? How comes a servant to know Milton?" "The late Duchess Eleanor was kind enough to teach me letters," Marjorie answered, her voice softening at the mention of her beloved benefactress. "She believed learning should not be bound by station." "My mother taught you?" Alistair demanded, his earlier mockery giving way to genuine astonishment. "Impossible. She would never waste her time thus." "She was a woman of profound compassion," Marjorie said. "We would read together in the library during quiet afternoons. Paradise Lost was a particular favorite of hers." Alistair strode to the window, gripping the stone sill as he stared out into the darkness. His world had tilted askew. This woman he had married in drunken sport was not the simpleton he had assumed. She spoke with education and dignity that rivaled any noble lady's. "The mind is its own place," he muttered, repeating her earlier quote. The words seemed to mock him now. Behind him, he heard the soft rustle of skirts as Marjorie knelt beside the bed. Her quiet voice lifted in prayer. "Lord, grant us wisdom in our folly and mercy in our pride. Let not hatred dwell where understanding might grow. Amen." The candles burned lower, shadows lengthening across the chamber floor. Neither spoke as the minutes crept past. Alistair remained at the window, his back rigid, while Marjorie continued her silent devotions. The first pale light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, yet still they maintained their positions, each lost in private thoughts as an uncertain future stretched before them. The Duke's chambers, so often his private sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield where the first skirmish had ended in unexpected defeat. His carefully constructed worldview had taken its first crack, letting in doubts he had never before entertained. As he watched the stars fade from the sky, one thought repeated in his mind. Who exactly was this woman he had so rashly married? In the growing light, the once brilliant candles guttered in their holders, their flames dim and uncertain as the silence between husband and wife deepened into the approaching dawn. Dawn crept over Hawthorne House, painting the stone walls in soft golden light. The servants' quarters hummed with whispers and gasps as maids and footmen shared the scandalous news. Their master had married Marjorie Wells, the kitchen maid, in a midnight ceremony. "Did you hear?" Sarah, a chambermaid, whispered to the cook as she stoked the kitchen fire. "His Grace actually went through with it. Lord Fenwick's wager made him marry our Marjorie." The cook shook her head, kneading bread with vigorous disapproval. "Heaven help us all. Such foolishness will bring nothing but trouble." Words spread like wildfire through the breakfast room where visiting gentry gathered. Ladies, hidden behind. Fancy fans murmured in shock while gentlemen exchanged knowing smirks. The Duke himself burst in, his face thunderous, making straight for where the chaplain sat nervously sipping his morning tea. "You there!" Alistair's voice boomed across the room. "This farce of a marriage must be annulled at once. I demand you declare it void." The chaplain dabbed his mouth with a trembling hand, but held firm. "Your Grace, I cannot." The ceremony was performed under proper license, with witnesses present. The vows were spoken freely by both parties. In the eyes of God and law, the marriage is binding. "Surely there must be some way," Alistair began, but a commotion at the door interrupted him. A messenger in royal livery, dusty from hard riding, bowed low. "Your Grace, urgent dispatches from London." He presented a sealed letter with shaking hands. "Word of your marriage has reached the highest circles." Alistair snatched the letter, his face growing pale as he read. The whispers had already reached court. His reputation, his standing among his peers, everything he had built hung by a thread. Outside at the gates, Marjorie went about her usual morning task of distributing bread to the poor. She wore her new status with quiet dignity, despite the sideways glances and poorly hidden sneers from passing carriages. "Look at her," one fine lady scoffed from her coach. "Playing at being a duchess while handing out bread like a common servant." But Marjorie continued her work, meeting each poor soul with the same gentle smile she had always shown. "God bless you," she murmured, pressing fresh bread into gnarled hands. "Keep warm and well." As evening approached, Marjorie retreated to her new chambers, rooms that still felt foreign and grand. A knock at the door revealed Mrs. Porter, her late benefactor's trusted companion. "The Duchess, God rest her soul, left this in my keeping." Mrs. Porter whispered, pressing a sealed letter into Marjorie's hands. "She bade me give it to you only after you were safely married." Alone in the candlelight, Marjorie broke the seal with trembling fingers. Inside, she found a carefully preserved document bearing a noble crest, 3 falcons in flight above a crown. Her heart quickened as she read the careful script. "My dearest Marjorie," the late Duchess Eleanor had written, "the time has come for you to know the truth of your birth. You are the daughter of the Earl of Blackmoor, whose lands and titles were stripped away in the Revolution. I took you in as an infant to protect you, hiding you in plain sight until you could be safely established. This proof of your lineage I have guarded with my life, and now I entrust it to you." Marjorie pressed the letter to her heart, watching the candle flames dance. In her hands, she held a secret that could transform everything: her position, her marriage, her future. The very proof of noble blood that could silence every wagging tongue in the household. The parchment crackled against her chest as she breathed deeply, feeling the weight of this newfound knowledge settle around her shoulders like a mantle. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard as Duke Alistair Hawthorne mounted his stallion. His jaw clenched tight as servants helped Marjorie onto a gentle mare beside him. Custom demanded he travel with his new duchess, even if the thought made his pride ache like a fresh wound. "We shall inspect the northern farms today," he announced, coldly, not meeting her eyes. The stable hands stepped back, heads bowed, as the unlikely pair set out through the iron gates. They rode in silence along the country lanes, autumn leaves crunching beneath their horses' hooves. Marjorie sat straight. In her saddle, her plain brown riding dress, a stark contrast to the fine clothes Alistair's previous marriage prospects had worn. Yet there was a quiet grace in how she handled her mount, something that made him glance sideways more than once. Their first stop was the Miller farm, where a crowd had gathered outside the modest cottage. "Please, Your Grace," called out Martha Miller, her face streaked with tears. "My Thomas burns with fever, and the physician says he's too busy to come." Before Alistair could respond, Marjorie had dismounted and rushed to the woman's side. "Take me to him," she said softly, following Martha into the dim interior. The boy lay on a thin mattress, his small face flushed red. Marjorie felt his forehead, her touch gentle. "Fetch me yarrow and feverfew from your garden if you have them," she instructed. "And clean linen for compresses." Alistair stood in the doorway, watching as his new wife worked. Her hands moved with sure knowledge as she prepared poultices and spoke soothing prayers over the child. The villagers crowded around, passing her supplies and whispering words of gratitude. "The late Duchess taught me healing," Marjorie explained, quietly as she worked, not looking up. "She believed knowledge should serve all God's children, high or low." Hours passed as she tended the boy. When his fever finally broke, the relief in the room was palpable. Martha Miller fell to her knees, clutching Marjorie's hand. "God bless you, my lady. You've saved my son." They reached the inn well after sunset, taking the best rooms as befitted their rank. Alistair retired to the sitting room with a bottle of port, his thoughts in turmoil. The scene at the Miller farm had unsettled him deeply. The way the villagers had looked at Marjorie, with real respect, not the fearful deference they showed him, stirred something uncomfortable in his chest. As midnight approached, he heard her voice through the thin wall. She was praying. "Lord, grant him peace," she whispered. "Open his heart to love and mercy. Help him see beyond birth and station to the truth of souls." Alistair set down his glass, throat tight. She was praying for him, not cursing his cruelty or begging for escape, but asking God to help him become a better man. Later in the grand guest bed, he lay awake listening to her steady breathing from the adjoining chamber. The sound was oddly comforting, like the gentle tick of a clock or the distant roll of waves. His mind kept returning to her hands as she tended the sick child, to the quiet authority in her voice as she gave instructions, to the genuine concern in her eyes. What manner of woman had he married in his wine-soaked arrogance? Not the simple kitchen maid he'd imagined, but something altogether different, something that made his carefully ordered world feel suddenly, frighteningly uncertain. Marjorie's breathing continued soft and regular through the wall. Alistair stared into the darkness, troubled by feelings he could neither name nor banish. The late autumn sun filtered through the windows of Hawthorne House as Alistair observed Marjorie from his study. She moved through the great hall below with quiet purpose, directing servants with gentle words and warm smiles. Though they had returned from their journey only yesterday, she had already learned every servant's name and role. "Martha, dear, those tapestries need brushing before the dampness sets in," she said kindly to an elderly maid. "Perhaps young Tom could help you with the latter?" Alistair found himself watching longer than he intended. Where he had expected chaos from a kitchen maid thrust into authority, he discovered order. Where he had anticipated awkwardness, he found grace. Later that morning, a group of tenant farmers arrived with concerns about the winter wheat storage. Instead of sending them away as previous duchesses might have done, Marjorie received them in the kitchen. She listened carefully, offered them warm bread and tea, and made practical suggestions about protecting the grain from mice. "Your Grace?" His steward interrupted Alistair's thoughts. "The Marquis of Blackwood and his party have arrived for dinner." At the formal dinner that evening, Lady Blackwood's sharp eyes fell immediately upon Marjorie. "I hear the most fascinating tales about your unusual marriage," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Before Marjorie could respond, Alistair found himself speaking. "Indeed, my lady, I find myself fortunate beyond measure." The words surprised him even as he spoke them. "My wife's management of the estate has already drawn praise from our tenants." Marjorie's eyes widened slightly, but she maintained her composure. The Marquis raised his eyebrows while Lady Blackwood pressed her lips together in obvious disapproval. Throughout the meal, Alistair caught himself glancing at Marjorie more than once. She handled the subtle barbs from their guests with remarkable dignity, never rising to their bait nor lowering herself to anger. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Alistair found Marjorie in the gardens, inspecting the late roses that still clung to life despite the advancing season. "Would you care to walk with me?" he found himself asking, offering his arm. She accepted with a small smile, and they strolled together through paths lined with yew hedges. The morning dew sparkled on spider webs stretched between branches. "You surprised me last night," Marjorie said softly, "defending me to Lady Blackwood." "You surprised me first," Alistair replied, then chuckled. "Though I suppose you have been doing that since our wedding night." Marjorie laughed then, a clear, genuine sound that made his heart beat faster. "And here I thought you were too busy being angry to notice anything about me at all." Their shared laughter echoed through the garden, drawing curious glances from the gardeners. Alistair found himself telling her about his childhood adventures in these same gardens, and she shared stories of learning to read in secret with the old Duchess. As evening approached, they dined together in the small family dining room rather than the great hall. Candles cast a warm glow across the table as servants brought out simple but elegant dishes. "I never thought to ask," Alistair said, watching her cut into a slice of roasted pheasant. "Do you enjoy reading still?" "Very much," she answered, her eyes brightening. "Though I haven't had much time lately, with all there is to learn about running the household." "Perhaps," he hesitated, then continued, "perhaps you might enjoy the library here. It was my mother's pride, and few have used it since her passing." Marjorie's face softened with genuine pleasure. "I would like that very much." When the meal ended, Alistair rose and moved to her chair. Taking her hand in his, he bent and pressed his lips gently to her fingers. The touch lingered, warm and full of unspoken meaning. "Good night, Marjorie," he said softly, his voice rougher than usual. "Good night, my lord," she replied, a blush coloring her cheeks as she curtsied and withdrew. Days melted into weeks at Hawthorne House as summer's warmth embraced the estate. The great hall buzzed with activity as servants prepared for the midsummer feast, their footsteps echoing off stone walls as they carried platters and arranged tables. Marjorie moved among them like a conductor leading an orchestra, her quiet voice guiding each task with practiced care. The fresh flowers should line the center of each table, she instructed, helping a young maid arrange bright blooms. "And mind the candles are fresh. We want them to last through the evening's dancing." To everyone's surprise, Duke Alastair had taken to joining these preparations. He appeared each morning, rolling up his fine silk sleeves to assist with the heavier tasks. The servants exchanged wondering glances as their master hefted tables alongside them, following Marjorie's gentle direction without complaint. "Your Grace," she would say, a slight smile touching her lips. "Perhaps the musicians might be better placed near the western windows. The evening breeze will carry their music through the hall." "An excellent thought," he would reply, his own smile growing easier by the day. The servants who had once whispered cruel jokes about their new mistress now found themselves warming to her steady presence. Cook, especially, had become an ally, won over by Marjorie's knowledge of herbs and genuine interest in the kitchen's workings. When the feast day arrived, the great hall shone with polish and candlelight. Nobles from neighboring estates arrived, in their finest, though many still carried sneers behind their painted fans. But as twilight painted the sky in purple and gold, those sneers faltered. Duke Alastair stood at the head of the hall, resplendent in deep blue velvet. Without hesitation, he extended his arm to Marjorie, who wore a gown of soft green silk that emphasized the grace she had always possessed. A collective gasp rose from the gathered nobility as he led her to the center of the room. "My dear," he said loud enough for all to hear, "would you honor me with the first dance?" The musicians struck up a gentle pavane. As Duke and Duchess moved together across the floor, the watching crowd divided in their reaction. The nobles pressed their lips thin with disapproval, but the villagers and servants lining the walls broke into broad smiles. Here was their kind, mistress, dancing with the grace of any born lady. Through the evening, Alastair kept Marjorie close. He found himself drawn to her quiet laughter, the way her eyes sparkled in the candlelight. When she spoke with visiting farmers about their crops, he listened with genuine interest. When she danced with the village children, teaching them simple steps, his heart swelled with an emotion he was only beginning to understand. As the moon rose high, they found a quiet moment together in a corner of the hall. "You have changed everything," Alastair said softly, his fingers brushing hers. "I never expected, I never knew I could feel this way." Marjorie's cheeks flushed pink. "You have changed too, my lord. Your kindness these past weeks has touched my heart deeply." Neither spoke the word love, but it hung in the air between them, sweet as summer honey. Later, as the celebration reached its peak, they stood together on the manor's stone balcony. Below in the village, hundreds of paper lanterns dotted the darkness like earthbound stars. Their warm light reflected in Marjorie's eyes as she gazed out over the scene. Alastair stepped closer, drawn by an impulse he no longer wished to fight. His arms settled around her shoulders, strong and sure. After a moment's hesitation, Marjorie leaned into his embrace, her head resting against his chest. Together they watched the lanterns rise and fall in the gentle night breeze, their hearts beating in quiet harmony. The peaceful days at Hawthorne House shattered like fine crystal on marble floors. Lady Clarissa Montrose's gilded carriage thundered toward London, bearing news that would destroy everything. Her lips curved in cruel satisfaction as she clutched a sealed letter, proof of the wager that had led to Alistair and Marjorie's marriage. Within hours of her audience with the king, a royal messenger galloped through the gates of Hawthorne House. The sealed missive demanded Duke Alistair and his wife present themselves at court immediately. Marjorie's hands trembled as she read the summons over Alistair's shoulder, her heart sinking at the formal language that spoke of grave matters requiring immediate attention. "We must leave at first light," Alistair said, his voice tight with worry. He had grown protective of Marjorie in recent weeks, and now fear for her clouded his eyes. The journey to London took 4 days by carriage. Each mile brought them closer to their fate, the wheels clattering over rutted roads as summer dust swirled behind them. Marjorie spent the hours watching Alistair's troubled face, reaching occasionally to touch his hand. They spoke little, both aware of the storm gathering before them. At court, the great hall blazed with hundreds of candles. Nobles lined the walls in their finest silks and jewels, whispering behind painted fans as Alistair and Marjorie were announced. The king sat stern-faced. Upon his throne, while Lady Clarissa stood to one side, her beauty made sharp by triumph. "Your Majesty?" Alistair bowed deeply, while Marjorie sank into a curtsy. "Duke Hawthorne." The king's voice cut through the murmurs. "Grave accusations have been brought before us." Lady Clarissa stepped forward, her green silk gown rustling. "I have proof, Your Majesty, that this marriage was nothing but a drunken wager." She produced the letter with a flourish. Signed by witnesses detailing how Duke Hawthorne married a kitchen maid to win a bet, mocking the sanctity of marriage itself. Gasps echoed through the hall. The king's face darkened as he read the evidence. Marjorie stood straight back, despite the heated stares and whispered insults, her dignity a shield against their scorn. "Is this true?" the king demanded. Alistair's face had gone pale, but he nodded. "The circumstances of our marriage began with a wager, yes. But since then—" "Silence!" The king rose, trembling with rage. "You have made a mockery of nobility itself. This common servant," he gestured to Marjorie, "conspired with you in this farce." "She knew nothing of it," Alistair protested. "The fault is mine alone." But the king would not be moved. "Duke Alistair Hawthorne, you are stripped of your titles and lands, effective immediately. You have proven yourself unworthy of noble privilege." His gaze swept to Marjorie. "And this woman, who dared rise above her station, she is branded a schemer, no better than a common thief of position." Clarissa's smile gleamed like a knife in candlelight as the couple were dismissed from court. They retreated to their modest lodgings in the city, the weight of disgrace heavy on their shoulders. In their chamber that night, Alistair's control finally broke. He seized a wooden chair and smashed it against the wall, splinters flying. "Everything," he choked out. "Everything I was born to, everything I built, gone!" Marjorie moved to him, through the darkness. Taking his trembling hand in both of hers, she whispered words that came straight from her heart. "Even in ruin, I am your wife before God." But Alistair could not meet her steady gaze. His fingers slipped from hers as he turned away, leaving her alone in the shadows of their fallen world. The journey back from London stretched long and bitter. Their fine carriage replaced by a humble wagon borrowed from sympathetic merchants, Alistair and Marjorie traveled dusty roads toward the northern reaches of what was once their estate. Summer heat bore down mercilessly as they passed village after village where they were no longer welcome. After 4 days of hard travel, they finally reached the small farming settlement of Millbrook. Here, just months ago, Alistair had led hunting parties through the surrounding woods. Now he arrived as a disgraced noble, with nothing but the clothes on his back and his wife by his side. Thomas Fletcher, a weather-worn farmer whose child Marjorie had once tended during the fever outbreak, stepped forward from the gathered villagers. "Your Grace," he started, then corrected himself. "Sir, we heard what happened at court. We may not have much, but we have a spare cottage. It's yours if you'll have it." Alistair's pride warred with desperation as he looked at the tiny stone structure with its thatched roof. Marjorie squeezed his hand gently. "Thank you," she said warmly to Thomas. "We would be most grateful." The cottage was simple. One room with a hearth, a straw-stuffed mattress, and rough wooden furniture. For Alistair, who had never known less than silk sheets and feather beds, it was a crushing change. Yet Marjorie moved about the space with quiet grace, sweeping the floor and arranging their few belongings as if it were a palace. Days blurred together as Alistair learned to work alongside the village men. His soft hands blistered on plow handles, his back ached from mending fences, his fine clothes grew stained with honest dirt. Each evening he returned to find Marjorie had transformed their humble dwelling into a home. She cooked hearty stews, over the fire, mended clothes with careful stitches, and greeted him with the same gentle smile she had worn in their grand estate. "You need not stay," he told her one night, his voice rough with shame. "You could seek shelter with your noble kin, now that your true birth is known." Marjorie paused in her mending. "I made a vow before God," she said simply. "Where you are, I shall be." As autumn approached, Alistair found his body growing stronger, his mind clearer. The villagers' initial wariness gave way to acceptance as he worked beside them without complaint, yet shame still gnawed at him. He had lost everything, his title, his lands, his place in society, all because of foolish pride. One evening, bone-weary from helping bring in the harvest, Alistair trudged back to their cottage. Through the window, he saw Marjorie sitting by the fire. She was surrounded by the village children, their faces bright as she sang an old ballad about knights and true love. Her voice was sweet and clear, her eyes bright with joy as tiny hands reached for her skirts. Something shifted in Alistair's chest as he watched her. Here was the woman he had once mocked, now the heart of their tiny community. Here was the wife he had wed in scorn, now the foundation of his world. The firelight caught the curve of her cheek, the gentle smile that had never wavered despite all their hardships. In that moment, standing in the gathering dusk, Alistair realized a profound truth. He loved her, not with the shallow passion of his youth, but with a deep, abiding love born of shared struggles and quiet strength. He loved her wisdom, her kindness, her unwavering faith. He loved the way she had faced their fall from grace with dignity, the way she made their humble cottage feel like home. The realization left him breathless. He remained in the doorway, watching as she gathered the children close and began another song, her voice rising sweet and clear in the fire-lit room. The first signs of plague came with the autumn rains. What began as a cough in the miller's youngest, sun soon spread through Millbrook like wildfire. Within days, dozens of villagers lay burning with fever in their beds. The air grew thick with the sharp smell of vinegar, and herbs burned to ward off the sickness. Alistair watched with growing dread as family after family succumbed. When word reached nearby towns, they closed their gates. Merchants refused to trade. Even physicians from the larger settlements sent word they would not come, fearing for their own lives. "We cannot abandon them," Marjorie said firmly one morning, packing a basket with clean linens and the medicinal herbs she had gathered. Her face was drawn with worry, but determination blazed in her eyes. "It is too dangerous," Alistair protested, catching her arm. "You could fall ill yourself." She met his gaze steadily. "These people took us in when all others turned away. Now they need us most." Together they went from house to house. Marjorie remembered the healing arts taught by the late Duchess. brewing, tisanes of feverfew and willow bark, laying cool cloths on burning foreheads. Alistair carried water, chopped wood for the sick who could not tend their own fires, and helped the healthy dig graves for those who did not survive. The days grew darker. Food grew scarce as nearby villages refused trade. Alistair organized hunting parties with the able-bodied men, teaching them the skills he once used for sport. Now they stalked deer not for pleasure but survival, sharing every catch among the hungry. "You hunt like a common man now, my lord," one of the villagers commented, watching Alistair dress a deer with practiced hands. "I am a common man," Alistair replied, surprising himself with the lack of bitterness in his voice, and grateful for it. But the plague showed no mercy. Children grew orphaned as parents succumbed. Marjorie took them into the cottage, creating pallets before the fire. She sang to them at night, holding their hands through fever dreams, while Alistair worked himself to exhaustion caring for their needs. Then one bitter morning, Alistair woke burning. The familiar ache in his joints, the fire in his chest. He knew the signs. Marjorie's face went white when she felt his brow, but her hands remained steady as she helped him to bed. Through days of delirium, he was aware only of her presence, her cool hands on his face, her voice praying in the darkness. When the fever raged highest, she held him as he thrashed, speaking soft words of comfort. During one lucid moment, she pressed a folded paper into his hand. Through blurred vision, he made out a noble crest and words that swam before his eyes. "What is this?" he whispered. "The truth of my birth," she said softly. "I am the daughter of the Earl of Westerbrook, hidden away as an infant when my father's lands were seized. The late Duchess knew and protected me, educating me in secret. Why did you not tell me before? When we lost everything?" His voice cracked. With fever and disbelief, Marjorie's eyes filled with tears. "Because I learned long ago that true nobility lies not in titles or land, but in the heart. I prayed you would learn the same." The fever took him again then, plunging him into darkness. He dreamed of his former life, the grand balls, the hunt, the endless pursuit of pleasure and pride. How empty it all seemed now, compared to the simple dignity of honest work and true love. When consciousness returned, Marjorie was bathing his face with cool water. He could see the exhaustion in her features, the dark circles under her eyes from sleepless nights of nursing not only him, but countless villagers. "The others?" he managed to ask. "The fever is breaking in the village," she said. "We lost 17 souls, but many more will live. God has been merciful." Alistair reached for her hand, his grip weak but determined. Looking into the face of this woman who had transformed his life, he whispered, "You have made me noble, Marjorie, more than any title ever could." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she pressed his hand to her heart. Outside their cottage window, the autumn sun broke through clouds that had darkened the village for weeks. Like the plague that had ravaged their community, the last vestiges of Alistair's pride had finally broken, leaving behind something far more precious, the true nobility of a humble heart. Word traveled swiftly along the muddy roads from village to town, from town to city, and finally to London itself. Tales spread of the former Duke and his wife who had risked their lives to save a plague-stricken village. The stories told of their courage, their sacrifice, and the deep love they had earned from the common folk. The king's envoys arrived on a crisp autumn morning, their fine carriages looking out of place on the humble village roads. They found Alistair mending the village mill, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his hands rough with honest work. Marjorie was in the village square, teaching children their letters just as the late Duchess had once taught her. The villagers gathered, watching nervously as the royal representatives descended from their carriages. The lead envoy, Lord Pembroke, looked around in wonderment. Everywhere he turned, he saw signs of the couple's devoted service. The newly thatched roofs they had helped repair, the village green where they had nursed the sick, the fresh-turned earth of graves they had dug with their own hands. "Is it true," Lord Pembroke asked old Thomas the carpenter, "that the former Duke worked alongside you during the plague?" "Aye, my lord," Thomas replied proudly. "He and his lady both. They stayed when others fled. They saved my grandchildren." "They did, and many others besides." More villagers stepped forward, each with a story to tell. The miller's wife spoke of how Marjorie had stayed up 3 nights straight, nursing her fever-stricken children. The blacksmith described Alistair carrying water to every house, never resting while others were in need. "And what of the ladies? Manner?" Lord Pembroke inquired. "Does she carry herself as one born to privilege, or as a common servant?" A village elder stepped forward, her eyes bright with wisdom. "She carries herself as one born to serve others, my lord. Whether that makes her common or noble, I cannot say. But I know it makes her good." The envoys exchanged meaningful glances. From their satchel, they drew out a letter bearing the king's seal. Within was not only the proof of Marjorie's noble birth, verified now by the royal archives, but also a royal decree. The village green fell silent as Lord Pembroke read the proclamation aloud. "By order of His Majesty, in recognition of true nobility displayed through acts of sacrifice and service, we hereby restore to Alistair Hawthorne his title of Duke, his lands, and all associated privileges. Furthermore, we acknowledge Lady Marjorie Wells Hawthorne as rightful Duchess, both by her marriage and by her own noble blood as daughter of the Earl of Westerbrook." Cheers erupted from the villagers. But Alistair and Marjorie only had eyes for each other. They stood together, hands clasped, as Lord Pembroke continued. "His Majesty commands your presence at Hawthorne House, where a proper celebration of your union shall be held, with all due ceremony and witnessed by nobility and common folk alike." The return to Hawthorne House was like a triumphant procession. Villagers walked alongside the carriages, singing and celebrating. As they approached the estate, they found the grounds transformed. Garlands hung from every window, and hundreds of candles lit the approaching dusk. The great hall was filled with a mixture never before seen at Hawthorne House. Nobles in their finest silks stood shoulder to shoulder with villagers in their clean but humble best. The king's representative presided over the gathering, while the chapel glowed with hundreds of beeswax candles. Marjorie wore a gown of cream silk, her hair adorned with pearls, a gift from the ladies of the village. Alistair, restored to his formal attire, looked every inch the Duke, yet his eyes held a new humility learned in those days of trial. They stood before the altar, hands joined, as the blessing was given. The same chaplain who had married them, that first night, now spoke with genuine joy rather than trembling fear. This time, when he asked for their vows, both bride and groom spoke with hearts full of tested and proven love. As the candlelight cast its warm glow across their faces, Alistair turned to Marjorie, his voice soft but carrying to every corner of the hushed chapel. "I wed you for a jest," he said, "but I keep you for love." Marjorie's eyes filled with tears of joy as she squeezed his hand. Above them, the church bells began to ring, their joyous pealing echoing across the estate and down to the village below. The sound carried their triumph to all who could hear, a testament to love that had transformed mockery into miracle, pride into purpose, and two hearts into one. The entire congregation, noble and common alike, burst into applause as Alistair drew Marjorie into a tender kiss. Their story would be told for generations, not just of a duke and duchess restored to their proper place, but of two souls who had found their true nobility in service, sacrifice, and love. If something today spoke to the part of you that still believes in love, stay a while. subscribe. I'll be here again tomorrow with another story worth feeling.